No man is more dangerous than a king with nothing to lose, except a king terrified of losing his only heir. Dominic Castiglione ruled Chicago's underworld, but his immense power meant nothing as his infant son withered away. It took one observant nurse to uncover the sinister truth the elite doctors missed. The 7th floor of Chicago's prestigious St. Jude Memorial Hospital did not belong to the board of directors. For the past 3 weeks, it had belonged to the Castiglione crime family. Heavily armed men in tailored Italian suits stood like statues at every elevator bank and stairwell. No one entered the neonatal intensive care unit without being thoroughly vetted, searched and glared down by the grieving, ferocious head of the family Dominic Castiglione. Dominic was a man carved from granite and ruthlessness. At 32, he possessed a terrifying reputation, a billion-dollar syndicate, and a stare that could freeze blood. But standing outside the glass incubator of his premature son, Leo the dreaded Mafia Boss, was just a helpless, broken father. Leo's birth had been bathed in blood. 3 weeks prior, a rival faction had planted a bomb beneath the SUV of Dominic's wife, Alessia. The blast had taken her life, but the paramedics had miraculously managed to save the child, delivering him at barely 32 weeks. Since that day, Dominic had not left the hospital. He barely slept, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of grief espresso and an overwhelming need to protect the only piece of Alessia he had left. But despite the millions Dominic poured into the hospital, despite hiring the most elite pediatric specialists on the East Coast, baby, Leo was dying. Explain it to me again. Dominic's voice was a low, lethal rumble that made the chief of neonatology doctor, Richard Alston, swallow hard. Mr. Castiglione, as I've stated, premature infants often face severe gastrointestinal challenges. Dr. Alston said, nervously adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. He was a man accustomed to wealthy, demanding parents, but the men flanking Dominic with concealed firearms made him visibly sweat. It's a complex case of malabsorption syndrome. We are pumping him full of high-calorie total parenteral nutrition, TPN, but his body simply isn't processing the lipids and proteins. His metabolism is burning through it faster than he can absorb it. He weighed 5 pounds 3 days ago, Dominic said, stepping dangerously close to the glass, his eyes fixed on the tiny, fragile chest rising and falling attached to a dozen wires. Today he is 4 pounds 6 ounces. He is fading away, doctor. And you are telling me a state-of-the-art facility can't figure out why a child is starving to death while hooked up to a feeding tube. We are doing everything medically possible. Do better, Dominic snarled, grabbing the lapels of Dr. Alston's expensive white coat. The guards at the door shifted hands, resting on their holsters. If my son stops breathing, Alston, I promise you, so do you. From across the sterilized room, Nurse Clara Hayes watched the exchange with a mixture of apprehension and quiet fury. Clara was not easily intimidated. At 27, she had spent 5 years in the NICU fighting for the lives of the most vulnerable patients in the world. She was fiercely dedicated, sharp-witted, and possessed a maternal instinct that had saved countless infants. She had also grown up in Southside Chicago. She knew exactly who and what Dominic Castiglione was, while the rest of the nursing staff trembled when they had to change Leo's IV bags. Clara treated Dominic like any other stressed parent with firm professional boundaries. Mr. Castiglione, Clara said, her voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room. She walked over carrying a fresh stack of sterilized blankets. Let go of the doctor. You're raising the ambient stress in the room, and Leo's heart monitors are spiking. Dominic froze. He turned his dark, hollowed eyes toward the young woman in the pale blue scrubs. For a second, The room held its collective breath, waiting for the Mafia Boss to erupt. Instead, Dominic glanced at the monitor, saw the baby's heart rate climbing, and slowly released his grip on the doctor's coat. Dr. Alston scrambled backward, gasping for breath. I'll go review the lab results again," he stammered, hurrying out of the ward. Dominic ran a heavy hand over his face, looking entirely defeated. "He's slipping away from me, Clara," he murmured, using her first name for the first time. Clara softened, stepping up to the incubator. She reached through the porthole, gently resting her sanitized gloved finger against Leo's tiny palm. The baby instinctively wrapped his microscopic fingers around it. "I know it looks terrifying, Mr. Castiglione. But Leo is a fighter. Call me Dominic," he said, quietly, watching her interact with his son. He noticed the way Clara looked at Leo, not with the clinical detachment of the doctors or the terrified pity of the other nurses, but with genuine protective warmth. "Why is he losing weight? Clara, tell me the truth. Is Alston right?" Clara hesitated. She had been reviewing Leo's charts meticulously for the past 48 hours. Something about the baby's decline was gnawing at her instincts. Premature babies with malabsorption issues usually showed other signs: severe bowel distress distension or specific liver enzyme spikes. Leo had none of those. He just had a steady, relentless caloric deficit, as if the food he was receiving was entirely void of nutrients. "I don't know," Clara admitted, her brow furrowing. "But I'm going to look into it. I promise you, Dominic, I won't let anything happen to him on my watch." That night, long after Dominic had finally collapsed into a fitful sleep on the leather sofa in the private waiting room, Clara sat at the nurse's station, cross-referencing Leo's blood panels with his feeding schedule. She pulled up the digital logs. The baby was receiving a specialized TPN bag every 12 hours. The bags were custom mixed in the hospital's pharmacy, according to Dr. Alston's strict orders. Clara pulled out a scrap of paper and began plotting the baby's daily weight checks against the shift changes. A cold chill crept up her spine. Leo wasn't losing weight gradually. The drops were episodic. His weight would stabilize during the day, but every morning at 6 a.m., following the night shift's infusion of the TPN bag, his weight dropped drastically. His body was literally flushing the nutrients overnight. It's not malabsorption, Clara thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. It's an induced metabolic crisis. Someone was intentionally keeping the infant from absorbing his food. But who? And more importantly, how the realization hit Clara like a physical blow. The secure wing was flooded with Dominic's men. A physical attack on the baby was impossible, but a chemical one that could bypass all the muscle and guns in the world. She needed proof. Accusing the chief of neonatology of harming a mafia don's baby without hard evidence was a death sentence for her, and likely for the doctor. She needed to know exactly what was in those IV bags. At 3 a.m., the ward was deathly quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Clara quietly left the nurse's station and made her way to the secure medical refrigeration room where the TPN bags were stored. She swiped her keycard. The heavy door clicked open. Inside, the sterile, cold air bit at her cheeks. She found Leo Castiglione's designated shelf. 2 fresh bags of milky white liquid sat there, prepped for the morning and evening feeds. Clara lifted one of the bags, holding it up to the fluorescent light. It looked perfectly normal. The barcode matched the seal was intact. She ran her thumb along the plastic seam. There. It was almost microscopic, hidden brilliantly behind the pharmacy's printed label. A tiny pinprick puncture mark sealed over with a dab of clear medical-grade adhesive. Someone had injected something into the bag after it had left the pharmacy. Clara quickly pulled a sterile syringe from her pocket, drew a small 5 cubic centimeter sample of the milky fluid and slipped the vial into her scrub pocket. She would run it through the mass spectrometer in the basement lab herself. As she stepped out of the refrigeration unit, she collided with a solid wall of muscle. She gasped, stumbling back. Dominic Castiglione stood there in the dimly lit hallway, the shadows casting harsh angles across his face. He looked dangerous, a stark contrast to the broken father she had seen hours earlier. "What are you doing, sneaking around the supply room at 3 in the morning?" "Clara." Dominic's voice was velvet and steel. Clara's hand instinctively brushed her pocket, where the vial was hidden. "I was checking the inventory for Leo's morning feed." Dominic took a step closer, crowding her against the wall. The scent of dark espresso and expensive cologne surrounded her. "You're a terrible liar. Your pulse is racing. I can see the vein in your neck." He leaned down, his eyes boring into hers. "You found something? Tell me." Clara looked up at him, caught between her professional duty to report to the hospital board and the terrifying reality of the man standing before her. If she told him now, Dominic would likely execute the entire medical staff. "I have a theory," Clara whispered, refusing to back down from his intense gaze. "But if I'm right, Dominic, you need to trust me. You cannot fly off the handle. You cannot kill anyone. If you make a scene, whoever is doing this will cover their tracks, and I will never be able to prove it." Dominic's eyes widened a fraction. Someone is doing this to him. The sheer murderous intent that rolled off him was suffocating. "Who?" "I don't know yet," Clara lied smoothly. "I need to test his feed. But I need you to stay in the waiting room and act like everything is perfectly normal. Can you do that?" Dominic stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He reached up his large, calloused hand, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was startlingly tender, sending a hot spark of electricity straight down her spine. "If you save my boy Clara, there is nothing in this world I won't do for you." Clara swallowed hard, nodding. "I'll be back before dawn." She hurried toward the service elevators, her mind racing. She went down to the basement pathology lab. It was empty at this hour. Using the skills she'd learned during her pharmacology rotation in nursing school, she fed the 5 cubic centimeter sample into the spectroanalyzer and waited. 20 minutes later, the machine printed out the chemical breakdown. Clara scanned the receipt, her eyes widening in horror. Dinitrophenol DNP. It was a highly toxic synthetic chemical compound once used in the 1930s as a diet pill before being banned globally. It worked by uncoupling oxidative phosphorylation in cells, essentially causing the body to burn through fat and calories at a deadly, unstoppable rate. It raised the internal body temperature and starved the organs of energy. Given to a premature baby in microdoses, it mimicked severe failure to thrive. It was an invisible, agonizing death sentence, and it could only be administered by someone with access to high-tier medical synthetics. Clara bolted from the lab. She needed to pull the tampered bags immediately and swap them with a fresh batch from a different patient's untampered supply to keep Leo alive. As she hurried up the back stairwell to avoid Dominic's guards, she paused on the 5th-floor landing. She heard voices echoing softly from the floor above. "Taking too long? The boss is starting to ask questions." Clara froze, pressing herself into the shadows. She recognized the thick, raspy Chicago accent. It was Vincente Rossi, Dominic's cousin, and the family's underboss. He had been a constant presence in the hospital, supposedly offering Dominic support. "I am moving as fast as I safely can without raising alarms," a second, highly irritated voice replied. Clara's blood ran cold. It was Dr. Alston. "Well, speed it up, Doc," Vincente sneered. Alessia was supposed to die with the brat still inside her. Now we have this prolonged melodrama. Dominic is an emotional wreck. The captains are losing faith in his leadership. If the kid dies, Dominic breaks completely. He steps down, I take the seat, and you get that $2 million donation to your private clinic. But if the kid lives, Dominic recovers. The compound is working, Dr. Alston whispered harshly. His organs are shutting down from caloric deficit. He won't last another 48 hours. Just keep Castiglione distracted. Clara clapped a hand over her mouth to muffle her gasp. It wasn't just a medical error. It was an orchestrated assassination. Vincente Rossi was trying to usurp the throne by torturing Dominic through the slow murder of his son. She waited until she heard the heavy door of the stairwell close as Vincente left, followed by the lighter footsteps of Dr. Alston ascending toward the NICU wing. Clara sprinted up the remaining stairs, slipping into the 7th-floor corridor, just in time to see Dr. Alston walking toward the TPN refrigeration room. He was going to spike the next bag. She had to get to the evidence before he destroyed it. She rushed into the supply closet, adjacent to the fridge, to grab an evidence bag and a sterile lockbox. But in her haste, a metal bedpan clattered loudly to the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet ward. The door to the supply room slowly opened, casting a long, ominous shadow across the floor. Clara backed up against the wire shelving, her hand instinctively clutching the printed lab results. Dr. Alston stepped into the room, locking the heavy door behind him. He looked at Clara, then down at the lab printout in her trembling hand. A cold, menacing smile spread across his face. "You always were too smart for your own good, Nurse Hayes," he said softly, pulling a pre-filled syringe from his coat pocket. "It's a shame about the sudden, fatal cardiac arrest you're about to have." "Doctor," Richard Alston advanced the needle of the syringe, catching the harsh fluorescent light of the supply room. He expected the young nurse to cower, to beg for her life, or to scream. He expected an easy kill, one he could mask as a tragic, stress-induced cardiac event, using the untraceable potassium chloride in his hand. What the arrogant chief of neonatology didn't know was that before Clara Hayes wore pediatric scrubs, she wore OCP camouflage. She had spent 4 years as a frontline army combat medic attached to a forward operating base in the Korengal Valley. She was not a civilian who panicked at the sight of a weapon. She was a highly trained professional, accustomed to making life-or-death decisions while under mortar fire. As Alston lunged, thrusting the needle toward her neck, Clara didn't retreat. She pivoted sharply on her left foot, stepping inside his guard. With lightning speed, she struck his forearm with a brutal, rigid palm heel. The sickening crack of fracturing bone echoed in the small room, followed instantly by Alston's high-pitched shriek. The syringe clattered harmlessly to the linoleum floor. Before the doctor could even process the blinding pain in his arm, Clara swept his legs out from under him. He crashed to the ground, the breath exploding from his lungs. In a fraction of a second, Clara had her knee pinned squarely against his throat, cutting off his airway, her eyes blazing with cold, unrestrained fury. "You broke your Hippocratic oath, Doctor," Clara hissed, pressing her knee down just enough to make his eyes bulge in terror. "But more importantly, you tried to murder a helpless infant on my shift." The heavy door to the supply closet suddenly burst open, nearly tearing off its hinges. 2 enormous men in tailored suits leveled suppressed firearms into the room, sweeping for targets. A second later, Dominic Castiglione stepped through the threshold. The Mafia Don took in the scene, the shattered syringe on the floor, the terrified, gasping chief of neonatology pinned to the tiles, and the pale but entirely composed nurse kneeling on top of him. Dominic's dark eyes flicked to the printed toxicology report, still clutched in Clara's hand, and then to the terrified doctor. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't curse. The absolute dead silence that radiated from him was infinitely more terrifying. "Clara," Dominic said, his voice a gravelly whisper that sent shivers down the spines of his own heavily armed guards. "Get up." Clara slowly rose, keeping her eyes locked on Alston, as the two guards hauled the whimpering doctor to his feet, pinning him against the wire shelving. "He's been poisoning Leo," Clara said, her voice steady, handing Dominic the lab printout. "It's a synthetic compound called dinitrophenol. It forces the body to burn through calories at a lethal rate. It mimics severe malabsorption. It wasn't a medical mystery, Dominic. It was an assassination." Dominic stared at the paper. His jaw tightened so hard it looked as though his teeth might shatter. He stepped toward Doctor, Alston drawing a heavy, custom-engraved 1911 pistol from his shoulder holster. He pressed the cold steel barrel directly against Alston's forehead. "Please," Alston sobbed, his pants suddenly darkening with urine. "Please, Mr. Castiglione. It wasn't my idea. He threatened me. He said he would destroy my career." "Who?" Dominic asked. The single word was a death sentence. Clara stepped forward, placing a firm hand over Dominic's gun hand. The guards tensed, shocked that anyone would dare touch the boss when he was in a murderous rage. But Dominic didn't pull away. He merely looked at her. "It was Vincente," Clara said quietly. "I heard them talking in the stairwell. Vincente is orchestrating this. He wants Leo to die, so you suffer a complete psychological break. He wants to take your seat at the head of the family." Dominic's eyes widened a fraction, the betrayal striking him like a physical blow. Vincente Rossi was his own flesh and blood. They had grown up in the same house. "If you shoot Alston now," Clara continued, keeping her voice incredibly calm and grounded, "Vincente will hear the gunshot, or he'll figure out the doctor is missing. He will deny everything, and you won't have the proof you need for your captains. A mafia boss who executes his own family members on a mere suspicion loses the respect of his syndicate. We need to trap him. We need him to confess in front of your men." Dominic stared at Clara. In all his years ruling the Chicago underworld, he had never met a woman whose mind worked with such cold, tactical brilliance. She wasn't just saving his son. She was protecting his empire. He slowly lowered the gun. He turned his terrifying gaze back to the weeping doctor. "Here is what is going to happen, Richard," Dominic whispered softly. "You are going to walk back out to that NICU, and you are going to swap my son's poisoned IV bags for clean ones. He is going to get real nutrients tonight. And then at exactly 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, you are going to call a code blue. You are going to tell Vincente that my son is dead." Alston nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "Yes. Yes, anything. I swear. And if you try to warn him," Dominic added, his voice devoid of all humanity, "I won't just kill you. I will hire Garda World Private Security to track down your ex-wife in Boston and your daughter at Stanford, and my men will make sure you watch them burn before I take your eyes. Do we have an understanding?" Alston sobbed a pathetic broken sound. "Yes, I understand." Dominic turned back to Clara. The murderous aura vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, profound gratitude. "Can you keep my boy stable until morning?" Clara nodded. "I'll mix the TPN bags myself. He's going to be fine, Dominic, I promise you." The next morning, at precisely 7 a.m., the piercing, shrill alarm of a code blue echoed through the 7th floor. Within minutes, the private waiting room became a hub of chaotic, manufactured grief. Dr. Alston, looking pale and thoroughly exhausted, walked through the double doors, his head bowed. He delivered the rehearsed news to the assembled guards and family members. Baby Leo had succumbed to massive organ failure. Dominic played his part with terrifying perfection. He shattered a heavy glass coffee table with a single kick, burying his face in his hands, portraying the image of a completely broken, defeated king. Vincente Rossi arrived 20 minutes later, his face arranged in a mask of solemn mourning, though Clara, watching from the nurse's station, could see the triumphant gleam in his dark eyes. "Dominic, my brother," Vincente murmured, pulling the larger man into an embrace. "I am so sorry. The tragedy of this family. It is too much." "He's gone, Vince," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking perfectly. "I have nothing left." Vincente patted his back, then turned to the 6 capo regimes, the captains of the Castiglione family, who had been summoned to the hospital to pay their respects. They were hardened, dangerous men, standing uncomfortably in their sharp suits amidst the sterile medical environment. "Gentlemen," Vincente announced, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "this is a dark day for our syndicate. With the loss of his wife, and now his heir, it is clear that Dominic is in no condition to lead. His mind is compromised by grief. The Russian syndicates are pushing our borders on the south side. The Krolink financial audits from last quarter show our shell corporations are vulnerable. We need strong, focused leadership." Vincente took a deep breath, puffing out his chest. "As underboss, it is my sworn duty to step up. For the good of the family, I am assuming control of the Castiglione operations, effective immediately." The capos exchanged uneasy glances. It was a bold move, but in their brutal world, weakness was not tolerated. A few of them began to nod in agreement. "Is that right, Vince?" Dominic's voice sliced through the room. It wasn't the broken, weeping voice of a grieving father. It was sharp, cold, and entirely lethal. Dominic stood up, straightening his suit jacket. He walked past the shattered glass of the coffee table, his posture radiating absolute, terrifying authority. He gestured toward the doorway. Clara Hayes walked into the waiting room. Cradled securely in her arms, bundled in a warm blue blanket, was a tiny, breathing, very much alive baby Leo. The infant was already looking healthier, his skin regaining its pinkish hue after receiving proper, untainted nutrition for the first time in weeks. Vincente's jaw dropped. The blood drained completely from his face. "What is this Alston said?" "Alston said exactly what I told him to say." Dominic interrupted smoothly. From the hallway, 2 of Dominic's largest enforcers dragged Dr. Alston into the room and threw him onto the carpet at Vincente's feet. Dominic pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket and pressed play. The high-quality audio filled the silent room. It was Dr. Alston's terrified voice recorded hours earlier in the supply closet, detailing the entire conspiracy. How Vincente provided the dinitrophenol, how Vincente paid him $2 million through offshore accounts to slowly starve the Mafia heir to death so Vincente could usurp the throne. The capos listened, their expressions shifting from grief to pure murderous outrage. Betrayal of this magnitude, harming an infant of the Don, was the ultimate sin in their world. "You set me up," Vincente hissed, taking a step backward, his hand reaching for the firearm inside his jacket. Before his fingers could even touch the grip, 4 different capos drew their weapons, aiming directly at Vincente's head. He froze, completely surrounded by his own men. "You broke the oath, Vince," Dominic said, quietly, stepping forward until he was mere inches from his cousin's face. "You targeted a mother and a child. You are no longer family. You are nothing." Dominic turned to his most trusted capo. "Take him to the meatpacking facility on Halstead Street. Take your time with him. Ensure he understands the cost of treason before he stops breathing." "No, Dominic, please. We're blood," Vincente screamed as the men grabbed him, dragging him, kicking and thrashing out the back service elevator. His screams echoed down the corridor before being abruptly silenced by the heavy steel doors. Dominic looked down at the trembling doctor. "And as for you, Richard, the medical board won't hear about this. But Federal Judge Harrison, who owes me a great many favors, will. You are going to plead guilty to massive medical fraud and narcotics distribution. You will get 20 years in Marion Penitentiary. My men control Cell Block D. I have instructed them to make sure you live a very long, very painful life." Alston collapsed, sobbing into the carpet as the guards hauled him away. The storm had passed. The waiting room was empty, save for Dominic, Clara, and the sleeping infant. Dominic walked over to Clara. The terrifying, ruthless Mafia Don vanished, leaving only a profoundly grateful father. He looked down at Leo, gently stroking the baby's soft cheek, then slowly brought his eyes up to meet Clara's. "You saved my world, Clara," Dominic murmured, the distance between them closing. Clara smiled softly, not stepping back. "I was just doing my job, Dominic. Someone had to look out for the little guy. You did more than that. You stood down a killer. You stood down me." Dominic gently cupped her face, his thumb grazing her jawline. "I owe you a life debt. Name your price. Anything in the world." Clara looked at the powerful, dangerous man, seeing past the syndicate, and the violence, seeing the fierce, protective devotion that mirrored her own. "I think," she whispered, her heart fluttering as he leaned closer, "you're just going to have to keep me around to make sure you stay out of trouble." Dominic smiled, a rare, genuine expression that lit up his dark eyes. "I think that can be arranged." 3 months later, the Castiglione Pediatric Wing opened at St. Jude's, fully funded by Dominic and overseen by its newly appointed Director of Nursing, Clara Hayes. Leo Castiglione was a thriving, boisterous infant, safe in his father's arms, and safely watched over by the brilliant, fearless woman who had become the heart of their family. If you were captivated by this thrilling story of mafia justice betrayal and the brilliant nurse who outsmarted them all, don't forget to hit that like button. We release new, intense, true-to-life dramas every single week. Share this video with your friends who love plot twists and sweet revenge, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.